Hey there, this is Natalie, and I'm going to be talking about Felix Argyle from ReZero today. But since I'm being careful to avoid the wrath of Kadokawa, who have a real thing for copyright striking ReZero stuff, I'm not going to be using any clips and images from the show. So Felix will be represented by some random cats. Because yes. Now, the topic of the video is a controversy that pops up every now and again, and honestly, as a controversy, it's not really a big deal. But I do think it opens up an opportunity to talk about various things, like when canon is important and when it isn't, and of course the ever debated topic of representation in anime and in fiction as a whole. Before I start on that though, I do have to give the disclaimer that I'm not trans or a member of the LGBTQ community, and so when I'm talking about these topics, it's just as a writer and a ReZero fan, and anything I say about topics like representation is based on what I've seen people from those communities say, and I'm not really trying to speak for anybody. I feel like I need to say that because I get asked at least a couple of times a week if I'm trans, and no, I'm not. I don't really get it. That was never a question I got asked based on my voice before I started YouTube. I mean, I have a fairly deep voice for a woman, but in singing terms, I'm an alto, which isn't even the lowest common range for a female voice. So I wouldn't have thought I'd sound like I was born with male speaking parts and trained to sound more feminine, like trans women usually do. But I think maybe the VTuber thing throws people off. Generally, I don't care too much about people thinking that, but when I want to talk about certain topics like this, I do think it's important to establish that I'm not speaking as someone with those experiences. Basically, I'm not trans representation. And that's a good point to segue from talking about my damn self to talking about Felix. So to start with, we do need to establish what the canon is, and canonically, Felix isn't trans. The backstory of why he started dressing as a girl and acting in the cute, hyper-feminine way he sometimes does is in the ReZero X1 prequel novel. I don't think it's necessary to spoil the story to talk about this, but in vague terms, he does this because of his devotion to Crush. He promised to take care of her feminine side for her because she felt like she needed to suppress that aspect of herself to do her duties as head of the Carston family. Crush also likes how Felix looks that way, which makes him happy. However, you don't really need to know his backstory to know that he isn't a trans woman. It's evidenced in the anime by the fact he literally tells everyone he's a man all the time. A trans woman who presented as a beautiful girl wouldn't do that, because if a trans woman is being treated as a woman, there would be nothing to correct. But Felix corrects people who take him to be a woman by telling them he's all man. And he seems quite happy to enjoy the effect this has on people like Subaru. Some people point to his preference for being called Ferris or Ferry-chan over Felix, to being similar to a trans person not wanting people to use their old name, or dead name as it's known. But the act of using a dead name is seen as extremely disrespectful, indicating that the person using the dead name doesn't accept or respect that someone has transitioned. In Felix's case, we see characters who do definitely like and respect him still call him Felix, despite his preference. And this is shown to be more of a sign of someone being formal than being hostile towards him. This makes Ferris seem more like a cute nickname he likes people to use, which more formal characters don't feel appropriate using, like someone named David preferring to be known as Big Dave and their boss still calling them David. Felix doesn't seem hurt or angry when people call him Felix, more just like he wants them to lighten up. I'm calling him Felix in this video just because I think he's better known that way, and not everyone watching this is going to be a hardcore ReZero fan. But if I thought that it was effectively making a point to dead name a trans character, I wouldn't call him that. Yes, he's fictional, so it's not like it would hurt him, but it's the kind of choice that feels like it's making a statement. Yet with how Felix is written, I feel like it's not using a disrespectful name. It's just like using a full name for someone. So, canonically, Felix is a cross-dressing boy who wants people to know he's a boy, but also wants people to accept his feminine persona as cute. That's how he's written. And actually, I think it's better to know this even if you opt to go with a headcanon of Felix as a trans woman. And that's because, in reality, Felix would be judged as actually being quite bad or even problematic as a trans character written the way he is. Felix adopted this persona for someone else, for one thing. For another, he's shown to think it's funny to flirt with and tease men just to make them uncomfortable, something trans women probably don't want to be thought of as doing. If he was written as a trans woman, I think things would have been handled differently. Like, we probably wouldn't find out immediately from him saying so that he had a penis. It would be something revealed to Subaru in a less comedic way, or perhaps by a different character. Having Felix actually be trans would in a sense restrict how he, or in that hypothetical version of things, she, was written, because authors tend not to want to misrepresent trans people. As I said in my video responding to Norality's video about cancel culture, people can always separate reality from fiction, but in a lot of cases we do look to fiction for information, or at least for a dramatization of something real we don't get to experience in real life. And so if a fictional character appears to be representing something real, whether it's a job, a place, or a type of person you don't have much experience with but want to understand, it's natural to want to take some understanding or information away from that story. If the character you want to write is not going to serve as good representation, then you either have to change the character or just have them not represent the thing they don't represent well at all. Felix is a well-written character just as he is. So to me, it's better that Tappei decided to write him as a man and let the cross-dressing thing be something unique to him that also ties into his backstory. Tappei seems to be quite aware of the responsibility that comes with including representation, even in a fantasy story, as he has said in the past that he doesn't think he's good at writing LGBT relationships, so he doesn't write them. That kind of position may sound disappointing to people who want more representation, but honestly, I think it's actually sensible and shows an awareness that when you write characters and relationships representing what is seen as marginalized groups, you have to commit to doing it well. You can research it, and I think it's possible for a good writer to learn to write just about any kind of character. But if it's not the story you want to write, then I think it's fine to just say, I don't think I'll include that stuff. I don't think I can write it well. By the way, it's often misinterpreted that Tappei won't include LGBT characters at all, but that's actually not the case. There's a canonically bisexual male character who shows up in Arc 5. It's more that I don't think we can expect any big focus on the sexualities of characters or any significant romance plots relating to LGBT couples. So that's the way Felix is written. But does that canon always matter? If someone engaging with ReZero prefers to think of Fairy-chan as a trans character? Well, if it's a headcanon that you don't expect other people to take as the official way the character is, and you don't judge the choices the author made about that character with your interpretation in mind, So you don't, say, judge the characters who don't call him Ferris as being written as transphobic characters. Then it does no harm at all to have your own idea of Ferris to think about. To me, as a fan, it would be crazy to argue that anyone finding something positive or interesting in imagining a fictional character slightly differently from how they're presented would be doing something that has a negative impact on the work or on the fan community. People can really have fun with the media however they want, and Felix as a trans woman is honestly about as tame as it gets when it comes to ways people have chosen to reimagine anime characters. But is thinking of Felix as trans an example of a death of the author type interpretation? The concept of death of the author is one that gets thrown around a lot at the moment, and people do tend to use it without really learning what it means. So you hear it come up basically whenever someone wants to say, ignore the author of a work while still engaging with their work. For example, because the author did something in real life that the fan of the work finds unacceptable. But the original idea behind death of the author was really nothing to do with that, and instead to do with whether the author's intent matters when appreciating fiction, arguing instead that the reader's individual interpretation is what's important. Death of the author applied to this then would be to say that it doesn't matter what Tappei's idea of Felix is, and any interpretation you get from the story is just as valid. But while I personally don't like Death of the Author as an approach to analysing fiction anyway, I prefer the idea that there's one true interpretation inside of the author and we're kind of unlocking it by following the story. I don't think that the Felix is trans interpretation of ReZero actually counts as this anyway. This is because there isn't enough ambiguity in the work for the interpretation that Felix is canonically a trans woman to be made, without having to add, ignore or change some details to make it work. If it isn't a case where Tappei wrote something with one thing in mind, but which could be understood in multiple different ways, in which case Death of the Author would say any of those ways were as much there in the work as Tappei's intended way, then Death of the Author doesn't really apply. Instead, it's fairly clear in the work that Felix is a man, but some people find it more fun to think of him as a trans woman, or like the character better and find them more inspiring that way. So in this case, it's really more just a case of canon versus headcanon. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments how you like to view Felix, and any thoughts you may have regarding Death of the Author and ReZero. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks as always to my supporters on Patreon who are being shown on screen right now. I hope to see you again very soon.